Shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Pulse of Israel here in our eternal and ancestral homeland, the Judean hills of the land of Israel. So before we get going, and we're in for a real treat to get the latest and greatest on the political front with what's going on with Israel. We're supposed to have a new government sworn in on Sunday. So we're going to be talking to Jeremy Saltan in a moment from the Yamina Party and a Knesset insider. And anyone, if you are not yet a subscriber for these Pulse of Israel videos, please go to pulseofisrael.com and sign up to subscribe. That is the best way to ensure that you continue to see our video content. All right, let us bring in Jeremy Saltan. Shalom, shalom, Jeremy. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, Ami?
Good. I guess I can ask you the same question we started off before we went live. Are you sleeping much lately?
No, I'm not sleeping very much, but that's okay, man. I'll take it.
Okay. So just to bring everyone up to speed, as of this moment, it looks like we are going to have a government sworn in on Sunday at 4 p.m. Your party leader, Naftali Bennett, will be sworn in as prime minister of a coalition that will be including Yamina, will be including Yisrael Beitenu, Tikva Hadasha, New Hope, Lieberman's party, Blue and White, Lapid, who will then become prime minister after 2 years for the final 2 years, as well as the left wing, and I call them anti-Zionist party, Meretz party, and the Muslim Brotherhood Ram party. That is supposed to be happening on Sunday. So before we get into ramifications, any doubts whether that's really going to take place, or this is signed and sealed 100%? That's what we're looking forward to on Sunday at 4 p.m.
Well, of course, that's the expectation that we'll get to Sunday and then we'll have the vote. The vote right now is scheduled for 4 p.m. Based on the amount of speakers who want to speak, we'll see if it'll even be on Sunday or if it'll end up over midnight into Monday. And in terms of the changing of the guard, the ceremony is supposed to be on Monday. And we'll have next week a new prime minister. That's the expectation. In terms of what's going to happen between now and then, I'm sure Netanyahu is going to try whatever it is that he can. He's a chess grandmaster, and he's going to try to move and get whatever possible move he can think of in terms of stopping this. But that being said, if last week it was 5 moves to mate, and later on it became 4 moves to mate or 3 moves to mate. At this point, we're 2 moves to mate. I really don't see a lot of rabbits that are even possible for him to be able to take out of his hat. But again, I'll give him the due respect of saying until Sunday, he still has that time to try to be able to do that and succeed.
Okay, and again, a message that you've given across consistently, and this also that Naftali Bennett has been given across, is that even though this is a government coalition together with the far left and the Muslim Ram party and all the center-left parties, that this is still going to be a government that is right-wing or even more right-wing than Netanyahu's governments over the years. Do you still hold by that even after we beginning to see some of the leaks from the coalition agreements?
Well, of course, all of the coalition agreements will be released in a transparent fashion for the entire public to be able to get a chance to read and go through, and of course, put out their notes. I can tell you that the law requires we do that at least 24 hours before the vote. So I'm hoping that we'll be able to get that stuff out soon. I've seen various drafts of previous documents that have been going all around. There's obviously an interest in each person who decides to leak and what sections they decide to leak, and we'll put that all to the side. Next week you can already have a conversation when you're looking at the coalition agreements themselves. I can tell you after reading the coalition agreements and the coalition guidelines the following. It's true that in terms of the MKs that make up the 61 MKs, that the right is a minority. However, when it comes to the ministers in this government, and of course, we're not going to have a Ram minister or anything like that. What you are going to have is a situation in which the right votes, and by the right votes, I mean the ones of Sar and Bennett on one half, and then on the other half of this government, because it's a 2-half government, I'll explain what that is in a minute, but having an entire half, which is 100% right wing, and then on the other half having right wing elements such as Lieberman voting on that side, that just in essence becomes more right wing than the previous government that we're replacing, in which on the Netanyahu side, on the right side of the government, there of course with the Haredim, and then on the other side it's Gantz and the Labor Party in blue and white. So there's no right wing elements on the other side. So already there you can see an improvement. And then in the security cabinet, where the most important sensitive things are being decided on, over there's going to be a majority for the right wing. So as you see, even though the composition of the MKs might not give a majority to the right, the government does in terms of the cabinet. And then in the security cabinet, you even have a very good majority for the right there. In terms of what I was saying, in terms of the half-half government, even though the MKs of both the New Hope Party of Gideon Sa'ar and Bennett's Yamina Party are a minority among the MKs, the ministers that are going to be representing those parties in the coalition will have their vote weighted so that it is equal to the other 6 parties that are in this coalition. Of course, Ram is not actually part of the ministers, but of the other 5, that being Lapid, Blue and White, Labor, Meretz, and Lieberman. So that means that depending on exactly who shows up for each vote, of course, but you could have a situation potentially where if Matan Kahana is voting as a minister of Yamina, that his vote might count as 3 votes. So it's much more weighted in our direction in terms of being able to influence what's going on there. And it's enough that we get one guy from the other side, assuming we all vote as a block, and we already have a majority on quite a number of issues. So again, in terms of people calling this a left-wing government or whatever, this is by far not, in terms of the executive branch, this is not at all a left-wing government. This is very much slanted to the right. And this is more slanted to the right, both in the government and in the security cabinet, than the current Netanyahu-Gantz administration.
So a follow-up question to that, and then I'll ask some of the issues that have already come up. Again, from the coalition agreements that were leaked so far, it does seem that for right-wing, for many, if not all right-wing issues in terms of legislation, the left parties have veto power. And for left-wing issues, the right-wing parties have veto power. So it sounds like regardless of whether there's a majority or not on any ideological issue, whether from right or left, it's just going to be vetoed from the other side. Is that a correct assumption or a wrong assumption?
So the way that this has been created is that all the stuff that we want, and all 8 parties of this coalition want to have something for their constituency. And all of the coalition agreements make sure that each side does have something to bring home to their constituency. What we did is we put in veto power that would take stuff that are outside of the coalition agreement and try to create issues for various aspects of the government. What I assume you're going to see happening is that the first year, the Israeli legislative processes, Avi, can be a very long process. I think it's going to take us a year just to be able to implement all the pieces of legislation, the executive orders, the various, policy-oriented items within the coalition agreements. It might take us a full year just to complete all of those. The veto is there to stop people from preventing the implementation of those issues by bringing in new issues, or if you will, issues that were not agreed upon, and that's why they're not in the coalition agreements. And I actually think it's a good thing that there's a veto on both sides, because what that does is it makes sure that everyone knows that if you do propose a new piece of legislation, there is no chance for that to be brought into law if you're trying to do something here that's controversial. It's not worth it for you to go ahead and get those brownie points when ahead of time we all know that this is just something that's going to be defeated and is not going to get anywhere. Having that, if you will, that mutually assured, destruction of knowing that it's not in your best interest to do that, the other side will do that, and then you'll get into a veto war in which no one's able to do anything. I think everyone understands the coalition agreements give stuff to all 8 constituencies, and I think people are going to stick to it and not propose new things that are going to put things at risk, because they're going to want to get everything they can from their agreements. I think once you pass the first year, where the great majority, if not the entirety, of the coalition agreements have been dealt with. And by the way, there are certain things there that I can tell you right now that certain parties want, and I don't think they're going to get, because the Yamina Yesh Atid coalition agreement trumps the other agreements that were signed between Yesh Atid and other parties. So if we want, we can even veto some of those things that are even in their coalition agreements, meaning our veto is even stronger, where we can go in and intervene in quite a few parts of the other aspects of what other parties are trying to do on a wide variety of issues. So I do think once we get to the second year of this government, we'll be in a position where we can either approach new issues, and there'll be new issues that everyone wants to deal with, and we can go around the table and try to agree how to do that. Or we might see ourselves in a situation where instead of going back to the previous issues, or dealing with new issues, that you will have MKs that are more willing to push the envelope a little bit more. And you might have a situation already by that point where perhaps there's a new Likud chairman, which could also cause, changes within the strength of the government. But I think a lot of people, they're putting a lot of effort towards looking at the first, couple weeks in terms of the staying power of the government. I think that the issues that you're mentioning in terms of bringing up pieces of legislation that might be controversial for one side or another, I don't think we're going to have those type of issues until we get into the second year. But I think even if we're in the second year, that if we're able to go about this first year the way that we should, that we have the opportunity to go ahead and continue that. And if we see that we don't have the element of trust and people did try to play a bunch of games, that will ultimately, go into the ramifications of what happens with the rest of this term moving forward.
Well, I'm glad you raised that point in terms of potentially playing games, because right now the whole veto issue deals with legislation, but we both know, we're very familiar with the ideological left, and even when right-wing governments are in power, the ideological left use the bureaucracy of the ministries, use the left-wing ideological media, and use the courts to stop any and all initiatives, whether legislative or even just ministry initiatives or budgetary decisions, to stop right-wing policy. And my fear is, regardless of the vetoes regarding legislation, well, any ministry that will be run by any of these left-wing ideologues, well, they're going to play their games, running programs, funding organizations that go along with their ideology, that do not need any legislation made, and in that way do harm to the Jewish character of the state of Israel. Well, how do you respond to that?
Yeah, so I mean, so I'll tell you the good news and the bad news, as they say. First, the good news. The good news is that a majority of the most important ministries we kept. We kept justice in the right. We kept education in the right. We kept interior in the right. We kept the settlement, ministry in the right. We kept the religious services ministry in the right, meaning the areas in which you would be afraid that you would see the radical left trying to insert themselves. We made sure that our ministers would be there. It's either us or New Hope in these crucial ministries. And because of that, I'm not too worried, because I trust our people and their ability to be able to make sure that no one's going to step foot in these ministries that shouldn't. The bad news is that, you can't stop people 100%. You have to be, acknowledge this. For instance, Meretz is getting the environment ministry, right? It's like the EPA in the US, for American viewers. And I can't stop an organization that says they're an environmentalist organization, but then decides to be a completely different organization in practice from getting, funding from the environment ministry. There's always going to be some sort of loopholes, and there's going to be always some sort of attempt, if you will, to try to play games. But what happens is like this. If they start playing those type of things, then we'll start playing those type of things. And then we'll ask them, do you want to continue in this fashion, or do you want to stop? And this is where it's important, where the right wing has a majority. Because the left is in a minority within this government, it's not in their interest to play these type of things. If we start playing funding wars, we have more ministries, we have the more important ministries, and we have the larger budgets when it comes to our ministries. So if they start playing these type of games, if you will, we can outnumber them in terms of playing games of giving money to various NGOs and so on and so forth. I also feel that, from my conversations with these people, and as you know, these have been my adversaries. I've been on the media platforms for the last 15 years debating against these people,
Right.
explaining why it is that these people are doing completely, detrimental things in terms of, the future that I would like to see in Israel. Is that they have an understanding. They're saying, look, as long as you are willing to take a majority of your ideological stuff and put that to the side, as much as it harms us, internally and whatever, and also personally, we're willing to put most of our stuff to the side because there's a recognition that we need to pass 3 national budgets within the next 6 months. There's a realization that if we don't go ahead and catch up in terms of a lot of these plans that have not been dealt with in terms of investing in health, in education, in infrastructure, that we're just not going to have the domestic needs that we need to take Israel into the next chapter of its existence. We have fallen back in a lot of areas because we've not done the basic fundamental things of taking the taxpayer money from all of us and being able to prioritize that before redistributing it into public goods. And once you're able to go ahead and go about that, so that will be, if you will, the real test of seeing how much they try to play games when it comes to that. If they do decide to play games with that type of thing, and we're not able to go ahead and pass these state budgets, we're going to end up in a new election. That's just, that's what the coalition agreements say. And of course, we'll be going to this election in a situation where, everyone will know that we're the ones that made the big compromises, and they were the ones that weren't, willing to do any of that. And I think a lot of Israeli people who are not necessarily sure what's going on, if they see that there's one side that didn't live up to their word here, realizing what compromises everyone needs to make to go ahead and go into this, they'll understand that those are not trustworthy partners for the future, and they'll most likely be punished by the Israeli voter.
All right. Well, listen. I'll just throw out one example that I know bothers me. I'm sure it bothers you, but it's been on the top of my head specifically thinking about this whole scenario with this government. For instance, I'm very familiar with the relations with the diaspora, with programming. There is so much money today, even with the Likud government in power for years. So much money that is being used by Jewish organizations in America that go towards anti-Israel educational programming in high schools, in elementary schools, in colleges. And this is while there's a right-wing government in charge. And unfortunately, I mean, the one thing I came out of that I saw from the agreement with Merav Michaeli of Avodah, of the Labor Party, is that they want to be in charge of diaspora ministry. And I accept the fact you're saying the most important ministries are in the hands of the right. And then unfortunately, less important, but still of importance are in their hands. But again, with the diaspora ministry, with potentially a representative of the Israeli reform movement in charge, instead of my view is instead of Israel being used as an example to help strengthen the Jewish identity of young Jews in America, Israeli government money, even more than today, will be used towards whether anti-Israel or very powerful programming and organizations that are going to further damage the future of American Jewry's relationship with Israel, and as well strengthen their forces and power in infiltrating here in Israel, reaching Israeli youth with those very progressive left messages. So that's like just one example that I'm personally afraid of and vocal about.
So when it comes to the diaspora ministry, and that's a ministry I know very well, that's one of the smallest ministries, both in terms of scope of authority, also in terms of budgets, in terms of the identity of who the minister is going to be. My understanding is it's actually going to be Nachman Shai, who's going to be the minister, and not Gilad Kariv, who's the representative of the reform movement, because Merav Michaeli has this, what she calls as a prerequisite to being a minister, to have at least gone through one full Knesset term, which is something a majority of the MKs, whether it's in the Norwegian or not, have not been able to qualify for. Of course, this is Gilad Karib's first term So my understanding is she would want him to be an MK. Should he have already, had an MK position, it could be he would get the ministry. I know that he's lobbying for it. He's asking a lot of people and journalists to write that it's him in the position is a sure thing, is a done deal. My understanding is that's far from the case. There's, if you will, a race for that ministry, and my understanding is that Nachman Shai's won that race for the reason of what it is that I said. Of course, things can always change between now and the actual vote. From a procedural aspect, this is maybe one of the interesting things people don't know, because people are asking me, but this minister and that minister, the coalition agreements and the coalition guidelines determine which parties get which ministries. The distribution internally only needs to be done the day of the vote, and even I believe maybe only an hour before the vote, maybe even less than that. So a lot of the stuff that you've seen in a lot of the graphics that have been up on the various TV stations or whatever, I can tell you from inside, some of that stuff is not accurate. A majority is good portion of it is, but a lot of that isn't. The exact ministers and deputy ministers and all of that stuff will be announced at 4 p.m. tomorrow when we open the Knesset session. By the time we get to the vote and everything, like I said, we'll already know if that was approved or not. But until we get there, I can't even tell you that everything in terms of what everyone is saying is 100%, because none of that happens to be signed in the coalition agreements, in terms of which people. Of course, when you're talking about specific things of party leaders, that's a different thing. But I'm talking about the distribution of the different portfolios within the parties. So I understand what you're saying, but that's the thing, Avi. If you're going ahead and you're dividing up the government, you do need to give something to the other side.
Yeah, of course.
So you're giving them a small ministry with a small budget. Some people would even call it maybe half a ministry or a quarter of a ministry. Just to put in proportion, you want to look at the education ministry, right? I believe the education ministry's budget is about 200 times the size of the diaspora. So I could probably even budget diaspora programs in the education ministry, and that would end up, costing more than the entire budget of the diaspora ministry itself. And of course, as you know, a lot of it goes to staff and to pensions and to various things, even besides programs.
Right. No, I hear that. I'm still afraid of those ideological people. Knowing how, I mean, again, we both know how smart, how calculated, how planned out for years the ideological left is, because they have the funding of their foundations that is way beyond what right-wing organizations have. So they're all planned and ready to do whatever tricks they can when they finally get into power. So that's basically my major concern.
Again, I understand. The question again also is, are the right-wing organizations going to boycott us and not come to us for funding? Are they going to, decide that they're opposing the government and then they can't even go into these tenders or win these things?
No, I'm sure that's not going to happen. They're not going to cut off their nose from to spite themselves. Obviously,
I don't know. I would show you some of the messages I got, on my phone from some people, but as they say, talk is cheap. I believe a lot of these people will change their mind once we're sitting in our offices.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you. All right, so let me ask you some other issues that have come up. One of the headlines over the past few days was that Zev Elkin of the New Hope Party with Gideon Sa'ar brought up an issue that what happened to their agreement of their party having and also with the Yamina parties request or demand to have a new authorized office set up to deal with all of the land issues in Area C in Judea and Samaria. And Gantz wasn't giving up on that, saying he wanted to remain in control of that, which basically meant that he wouldn't take care of it. What's going on with that issue? Is that just smoke and mirrors for Elkin to get a better job position like he was received yesterday? Or is that real an issue that we're concerned about?
I told you all the coalition agreements are going to be released. I told you there are different drafts that are going around. So you have concern, meaning, if it's Zev Elkin or even me or other people, we'll read a PDF that we, download from some website. It'll be like, what? This isn't the same version of what it is that we're talking about. That's what I'm saying. You have so many versions, that were leaked at different dates. A lot of them don't even have signatures on them, as you might notice. So let's remember that what's final is the one that we submit to the Knesset, and that'll be open for everyone to look at. In terms of stuff I have to do with Area C, my understanding, again, based on media reports, is that Gantz had various meetings with different people domestically and abroad in which he said various things that are not connected to anything that was written within any of the coalition agreements. And he said just a bunch of things without consultation with Bennett or even Lapid, where again, Gantz is on the Lapid half of this government. So I can tell you there have been various meetings, subsequent to these issues between Elkin and Gantz and Lapid and Gantz and Bennett and Gantz, and also meetings with multiple people in the room and not just one-on-ones, so that everyone is on the same page. And this is, if you will, one of the main issues you have when you have a dragged out process. I would have liked to have done this a long time ago. The longer this process drags out, the longer the time in which people can come up with different issues, or also misunderstandings can come up. Once the official documents are released to the Knesset and we vote on them and everyone must, live up to them, there are sanctions if you don't. So, I'm quite confident all of that Area C stuff will be in the coalition agreements as they were when they were signed. I don't think you can really change the stuff that's already been signed before you bring it to the Knesset.
And that is that there will be a special office that Yamina and New Hope will be in charge of dealing with all the illegal Arab building in Area C?
Yeah, my understanding is New Hope is going to have more control there than we have. I would have liked to have had more control there, but look, you have to give people different things. There are plenty of times where I was like, we could fight with New Hope to take credit for these things or those things. They want to be able to go to their voters who are also right-wing people and say that there are various things that they're trying to go ahead and be in charge of, and then afterwards take credit for. What I care about mostly, and you know me, Avi, is I care about the policy wins. I don't care about the credit wins here. I think there are a lot of ways for us to have a lot of policy victories for the right in this government. And again, you can look at it the glass is half empty or half full. If you want to look at the MKs, so you're right, in the legislative branch, it's going to be very difficult. But that's why we have one of the things that we're doing, which is going to expand the Norwegian law that will allow us to put in a bunch new right-wing MKs and up quantity-wise the composition of MKs that we have in the Knesset working for the right. There are various things we're going to try to do. There are a lot of checks and balances within this agreement. And the thing that, again, to me matters most is that on a majority of the issues, the Yamina Yesh Atid agreement trumps the other agreements. And therefore, we have a lot of safety knowing that we can go over a lot of the others, even in their written agreements, if we end up disagreeing in terms of the interpretation of what a lot of that stuff means.
Yeah, and just to fill in people, I was asking specifically about this new Minhala, a new office to deal with all the illegal Arab land grab in Area C. That it is important to note, I have been very vocal that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has not dealt with that issue over years and allowed the Arabs to illegally build throughout Judea and Samaria, never giving the tools or the money necessary for the authorities in the army to deal with it and stop it. So it is a very, very important issue. So that was the issue I was asking about. And the issue you brought up was in terms of Gantz saying things around the world, and specifically to the Americans. Word was leaked out that he basically promised the Americans there would be a building freeze in Judea and Samaria, which I didn't hear Naftali Bennett saying anything referring to that, whether yes or no. He didn't deal with it at all.
No. He didn't himself. He's a little bit busy, as you might imagine, getting ready to be prime minister. The party put out a statement saying that wasn't true. So you mentioned one of the things that Gantz said. I mentioned, there was another thing where he met with settler leaders and he said a bunch of things there. Gantz has been going around.
Oh, that I don't know about. I only heard about him telling Blinken in America that there would be a freeze of
building. So I'm
saying
Gantz has been going around having conversations with people, apparently saying a bunch of things. He's going to be bound by the coalition agreements. He can say whatever it is that he wants. And I had said in terms of the division that is going to deal with Area C, that because you were talking about the joint, New Hope Yamina involvement in that, and I said there is going to be, but I'm conceding the fact, and you can say you want to say Elkin taking credit or whatever it is. New Hope is going to be the ones that have a larger role in that, and that I'm happy to allow them to do it as long as they get the job done, because that's what I care about. If they don't get the job done, then I'll criticize them and ask why we weren't the ones that got the lead when it came to dealing with that particular issue. What we're saying is that when it comes to all of these things, what we want to see in the end is policy objectives being met, and the credit wars, are less of interest to me. And people who want to go ahead and have talks off the record and say things that are in contradiction of the coalition agreements, or to try to manipulate stuff or whatever it is, they can keep trying to do that stuff until the vote. The vote's going to come, on Sunday. We're all going to go into the new offices on Monday. We're going to be in a situation where all that stuff is going to be transparent. And it's going to be a lot more difficult to pull that stuff in private meetings because, again, everyone's going to have the information. To go ahead and say that there's going to be a building freeze when it says there's not going to be a building freeze, when there's I don't actually know if it specifically says there's not going to be a building freeze, but we address settlement building itself, so that in itself should tell you that there's not going to be a building freeze if you're talking about building. But what it comes down to is you have a situation which is going to be bound by everybody, and if they're not bound by it, there are sanctions in place to people who don't follow the coalition agreements.
Well, it's interesting bringing up this whole building freeze issue, and hopefully there should never be another building freeze. And reminding everyone, it was because of President Obama's pressure on Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. He did enforce a building freeze that lasted a long time. I mean, thank God it was finally lifted. But one thing that people have mentioned to me, and I've thought about as well, people are worried about is Naftali Bennett himself mentioned, I think it was a few months ago, saying, and I don't remember the exact wording, you could correct me if I'm wrong, that he would not have been able to put up with the same pressure that from the whether the Obama administration or from America as Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu put up with. And knowing that Biden is not Obama, but and he's much weaker in many ways, but we have two other pieces of information. One, well, it's still the radical left administration of Obama. It's just Biden being the president. That's one. And two, it's not as a strong right-wing government to give backing for standing up to pressure from the Biden and Harris administration. How much can people feel secure that, yes, Naftali Bennett, even in this situation, will stand up to the pressure of the U.S. administration?
Well, I think that people need to remember that there was pressure by the U.S. before Netanyahu took power. That's not a new thing that America tries to pursue their interests, or any country, right? Iran is trying to pursue their interests. Russia is pursuing their interests. China is pursuing their interests. What it comes down to is this. You have to look at people and what their record is and what their policy is. It was Bennett who was able to stand up to the Obama administration a lot better than Netanyahu. If you look at
what are you referring to? I don't even know what you're referring to.
I'm referring to the fourth wave of the prisoner release, which was supposed to include Israeli Arab citizens, as opposed to what was agreed upon originally during the Kerry talks, which was the just Palestinian, Judean Samaria residents, as opposed to Israeli Arabs. That was not something that was agreed upon, and the Obama administration tried to sort of throw that in during the Kerry talks. It was Bennett that went ahead and went up against that. Netanyahu tried to shut Bennett down. Bennett stood firm, and we did not end up doing the fourth wave of prisoner releases as was requested, or even I would say required by the United States. And of course, there wasn't any price that we paid afterwards. We stood our ground thanks to Naftali Bennett, and people ended up being able to see a good outcome out of that, at least as far as the right is concerned, of course. Another example would be the Gilad Shalit, situation. We, of course, voted against that. And when we had an opportunity to be able to rearrest people released in the exchange, which is something that was never done before, to go back and rearrest terrorists that were released in a terrorist exchange, And of course, this is something that the Americans disagreed with and were vocal at the time. We went out and we pushed this initiative, and then we were able to attain it. I can continue finding examples in which the Americans put pressure to do A, and Bennett said no, and we ended up doing B. So I reject that thing that Bennett would not be able to withstand the pressure. And like I said, if you have a security cabinet that's even more right than the current Netanyahu-Gantz government, there's no reason to think that in a vote Bennett would lose because of Lapid or so on and so forth, unless you're in a situation where people like Gideon Sa'ar or Victor Lieberman would completely flip and leave their right-wing credentials and then decide to suddenly go against their previous voting patterns of the last few decades and jump over to Lapid, which, again, I would not see a reason for them to do that. And they're not even in the prime minister's chair, so there would not be an indication that there would even be an incentive for them to do that. So I reject that thing. Look, Netanyahu created this narrative that there is no alternative. The only person who can be prime minister is Benjamin Netanyahu. He's the only guy, and it's an exclusive business. And he built his entire career saying, it's either me or the guy on the left. And what he decided to do in the last election was leave Bennett in the opposition. We built up an opposition from the right of him. And unlike every other right-wing prime minister, with the exception of the resignation of Begin to allow Shamir, at the end of the first Lebanese war, which again wasn't, in an election, it was just, in the middle of a term. This is the first time that you have a right-wing prime minister being replaced by a right-wing prime minister. Usually what happens is the right is replaced by a left-wing prime minister at the end of an election. Here you have a right-wing prime minister being replaced by a right-wing prime minister. And this ruins his narrative. This ruins what Netanyahu is trying to say. So now he's trying to attribute everything that he's ever attributed to the left, such as not being able to withstand pressure, if it's America, if it's Iran, if it's Europe, whatever it is, and try to go ahead and put that on Bennett. But that glove doesn't fit, Avi, because if you look at Bennett's record, it's actually Bennett who has a much more right-wing voting record than Netanyahu on every single one of the national security and diplomacy issues of the day. So, that's the fear that the left have in terms of making Bennett prime minister. But when it comes to that type of a concern, I really do not see that one being legitimate. And of course, like I said, we were putting things into the coalition agreements that Netanyahu did not put into the coalition agreements with Gantz. Meaning, Netanyahu, is, again, as the person who was the leader of the right wing until now, when he had opportunity even to go into unity government, which he's now a part of, he did not look for policy wins for the right. Again, he can call this a left-wing government all he wants. We're going to be enacting a lot of right-wing policies, certainly more so than this previous government that did not have merits in it, of course.
All right. Well, just the past few days, of course, there's a lot of anger from the right and even a lot of voters of Yamina. And let's just say some people are using words they shouldn't be using. And the Israeli media has gone a few-day campaign basically calling out the horrible incitement from the right, even one horrific left-wing MK, parliamentarian, who's now going to be part of the coalition, Yair Golan, even bringing up a very prominent rabbi, actually my rabbi, Rabbi Druckman, trying to equate something he said today versus something he said back before Yitzhak Rabin was assassinated back in the 1990s, to that extent of trying to bring up incitement. The reason I bring this up is because I guess I would have expected Naftali Bennett to be a little more vocal about the media's dealing with the incitement campaign, because just until a few months ago, he and Ayelet Shaked were targets of the left's incitement and the media's incitement, and the media not dealing with them being incited against by the left for decades, for years. And even though, yes, incitement has to be called out, and it should be called out if anyone's saying it. I mean, it shouldn't be done. It should be called out. But still, all of a sudden, I guess some people, and even myself, are worried, like, wait a second, he's enjoying this etrog, this protection of the media, from the left media and from the left side, that just until yesterday were attacking him a little too much. And we want him to be vocal, to be calling out the hypocrisy of the left, even though he's now their knight in shining armor.
I don't really think that he's the knight in shining armor. I think there's still plenty of op-eds coming out every day calling on the left, people like Yair Golan or other members in Meretz Aram to vote against this government. There is pressure on the left not to allow Bennett to be prime minister, particularly if you're looking at Haaretz or 972 or a lot of the usual suspects over there. If you're looking at the mainstream media, so maybe you're right that there's more favorable coverage. I'll tell you like this. When we were looking to be with Netanyahu, I definitely got hate mail from the left. But I will tell you that the volume and the intensity of what I got for this government that we're making with Lapid from people on the right is a lot worse. I can tell you from conversations I've had with MKs that things are a lot worse. Bennett said in his public statements, he's given a few of them over the last week or two, talking about the fact that it's legitimate to criticize, to protest, to condemn, to do things. But he's pointed out also, and this is the important point, that there is a well-funded campaign against all of the people on the Yamina slate. What do I mean by well-funded? We see buses bringing people in and picking people up. Someone needs to pay for those buses. We see tables with foods and refreshment. Someone is paying for that stuff. You have people with very loud loudspeakers and other types of props. It's very clear that there is funding that's being put in here. Now, of course, you had plenty of funding going on from the left wing, protesters outside of Netanyahu's office for the last several years going ahead, and we've called that out when that happened. But right now, there is no one inciting against Netanyahu. It's quite clear, like I said, that his time as prime minister is coming to an end. There is incitement going against Bennett, but that's always what happens, meaning there's always incitement against the prime minister of the state of Israel. It doesn't matter if you're on the right or left. That exists. Some people will ignore it when it's convenient for them, if it's on one side of the map or the other. And, that's just the way it is. The difference that I see here, and this I think is the important point, is for the first time in Israel's history, you have MKs who are not ministers. They're not in a senior position of speaker or opposition leader or other things that by law require security detail. Here you have a situation where, because of threats and because of various calls to incitement, again, I'm not talking about the legitimate things going on. I'm talking about people saying, and I'll tell you, I've gotten this stuff. Also, you can go on my Facebook page. I'm constantly, deleting stuff of you should take off your kippah. Can someone go and take off his kippah? Right, that's a call to action. Lock your doors. I'm praying that you don't wake up in the morning. Can someone send me Jeremy's address? Those type of things, which are, I would say, less legitimate, and I think you would agree with me. I'm not talking about people calling me parasites or other various, things, which again is just part of politics. And believe me, I have a thick skin. This stuff doesn't get to me. It doesn't bother me. But to try to pretend that this stuff is not crossing lines in terms of the public discourse, and when you have situations, as I've heard from my friends, where their spouses are being threatened that they will be fired if the vote goes in the direction of Bennett winning, and they're not the ones to help Netanyahu here. Or we have a situation of one of the female MKs having multiple cars following her in every direction in terms of where she's going, or getting spit on, or various incidents of bullying of MKs and other members of the list in terms of their schools. I've heard of attempts to, gather together protests outside of Yamina members' houses when they're not even an MK. They're not even, they don't even have an ability to vote on Sunday. So again, you see all these type of things. I've never seen this before. During the disengagement, the Girush, which we all opposed very bitterly, you were very, very big vocal on this, Avi, back in 2005. we didn't go outside every single member of the Labor Party's houses or the different Likud members to try to, influence them in one way or another. Um, this was just not stuff that was happening. We weren't looking for their phone numbers to send them constant harassment messages. It was a bitter fight, but
Yeah. No, this is this is a modern
there were lines there, and we also didn't
this is a
call.
the modern form of protest that unfortunately the left started over the past few years
Yes,
because of their
so
hatred towards Netanyahu and
so
Likud and
again,
even attorney generals. So unfortunately, they created it, and now
oh,
unfortunately, some people on the right are
no, no,
following.
no. Again, I'm not saying that they didn't. I said very much
Yeah,
that this
no, I
was done
know.
towards the prime minister and whatever. What I'm
Right,
saying is this has trickled down
right.
from the top officials to a point where you have 4 regular backbencher MKs with level 5 security from the Shin Bet, and to pretend that there's nothing happening there and that it's normal. This was stuff that never happened on the other side. That is something that you can say. You never had a situation where people cared about number 6 in merits or in labor. You certainly didn't have a situation where people were putting up posters of candidates who are not even in Knesset yet to try to go ahead and influence them. I'm sure you saw Amit Segal a few days ago. There was the Yamina poster of the top candidates of our list with red X's on the ones that they were already able to get to come out against the coalition. And it was using the same graphics that George W. Bush used in Iraq in terms of the list of the top, of the faces of the top terrorists in Al Qaeda and and various other Saddam Hussein affiliates. And each time they would take one out, there'd be a red X in that same graphic. So again, and Amit Segal posted that and said it was going around in the Likud groups. Um, this is just crazy stuff. And like I said, I've never seen things trickle down from the top level to, if you will, the junior level of people who are involved within this discourse. And I think that's the major reason why there's a hesitation for people to go ahead and make an equation between what's going on now and what was going on against Netanyahu, because there were no protests outside of Yisrael Katz's house or Yuli Edelstein or Yariv Levin. This stuff just didn't happen. We're at a point now where they are really trying to deter people from being able to even be involved in public life. If I look at the Gafni thing, I don't know if you listened to what Gafni said yesterday. He
I heard
called
the
on
headline.
all. He called for Bennett to remove his kippah, and he also called on all of the religious communities to disassociate themselves with everyone on the Amina list. He used very strong language. He compared Bennett to Korach and the members of his list to Edato, of course, with the images of the swelling of the earth, and and the stuff coming out, in the hours after that was, not to allow Yamina members into Minyan, not to count them as a 10th man. I got to tell you, Avi, to say that, we remember when you had all of those lefties who were against, Gush Katif, and they were doing everything we could to be able to keep it. We never went ahead and said, if you're a lefty, okay, we're not going to go ahead and call you as part of our minion. And I'll remind you, that was a very small minority of the religious public that even supported that, especially publicly. I really feel that we are at a all-time low in terms of where the public discourse has gone. And you want to say is incitement, not incitement. You put that aside. You just look at the overall atmosphere of where the discourse is today. It is completely disgusting. It is very dirty. And I'm telling you, people that I know that thought about getting into politics, they are quite sure now that they are just not going to do it. It is going to be very, very difficult to expect to get a higher caliber of people when this is what it is that we see today.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm not. Hearing the examples they're talking about are horrible and very very wrong. Just to give context, for people who are not familiar with the situation, unfortunately, there was a lot of anger towards Yamina, your party. And again, I from the beginning, I always said your party shouldn't have even been getting most of the heat. It should have been Gideon Sa'ar's New Hope party, because in a sense, the two right-wing parties that could have made the first historic time ever for there to be more than a 61 strong right-wing conservative coalition, and here two right-wing parties are deciding to join and make a government with the left, and because of an impossibility, essentially, for there to be a right-wing party, because in essence, Gideon Sa'ar said no, and then Naftali Bennett and the Yamina Party want to have a government, not want to go to fifth elections, so the only way is to do this by joining with the left, and therefore there's a lot of anger. And listen, it's also there's a big fear, because every time people are not, and no excusing the incitement, for sure. The level you're talking about is horrific and wrong, and people should be punished if they're involved in doing that. But the fear of the left coming back into power, every time the left was in power without knowing whether to trust coalition agreements, right, and knowing the details of coalition agreements, every single time the left came into power, there was horrific damage to the state of Israel. Up until now, was mostly on the security side, and giving guns to terrorists and giving away our lands and making things even worse situation. I'm not as worried about. I don't think many people are as worried about that now, even though some people are. I think people are more worried about the Negev, which I was going to ask you about as well. But a lot of anger, and unfortunately, people are bringing up this anger in ways that shouldn't be. But let's go to the Negev. The Negev people are now saying that this Muslim Brotherhood Ram party, that this Lapid Bennett government sold out the Negev to the Bedouins, not able to deal properly with the illegal building situation there, which they basically overtaken the Negev. And again, it must be said, over years of a Likud government, there never was a solution. This is a problem that's existed for years, and even with Netanyahu in power, never was a solution implemented. The authorities do not have the power or the rules or the leadership to deal properly with the protection rackets, with the illegal building, the illegal communities, the land takeovers, the crime by the Bedouin in the Negev. And now everyone's afraid, with this deal with this Muslim Brotherhood Ram party being in this government, that's it. Now for sure the Negev is gone, and we could cut it off from the state of Israel. What sense can you make of that issue for everybody?
I'll just say at the top, again, I've seen the various things that were leaked, particularly by Abbas. The stuff that we publicized, that's what the real stuff is. And obviously everyone will have a chance to read it, and people who care about this very deeply, I'm sure they'll read every letter of every word of the official documents when they are released. In terms of stuff of what's going on there, you pointed out the Likud just decided to completely disengage and just not deal with the issue. What we're looking to do is some of the stuff the Likud has done in the past, which is, gathering the people together, putting them in fixed areas. Rahat is known as one of those Likud success stories of taking a lot of Bedouins and putting them in a city, and then being able to recognize that, of course, as a city, since there were various people living in that area before we went ahead and dealt with that. There are 3 such areas that Netanyahu had already agreed to go forward on, but he just never, even though he agreed that he was going to do it, he never moved forward on rolling the ball on that. So we said that if this was already something that was anyways agreed upon, we're going to honor that agreement. By the way, that goes to a lot of other things on a lot of other issues, stuff that Netanyahu agreed on, but then decided to go back on. So we're saying if Netanyahu agreed on it, so it's good for us, and we'll reintroduce it and we'll implement it. And it's going to be very hard for Netanyahu to explain also why it was that it was okay when he, decided to do it. And, maybe he'll explain there's a reason of why he didn't want to implement it in the end. But going ahead and continuing stuff that was known as Netanyahu policies, I think it's going to be very difficult in terms of the criticism, at least that he's going to have. I understand you'll have people like Smotrich who will be able to say, well, I didn't agree with Netanyahu then anyways. But a lot of the stuff that we're doing in this government is continuing a lot of the Netanyahu policies. A lot of what you're going to be seeing in terms of the Negev are stuff that, even though he didn't move on a lot of these things, some of these stuff were his original proposals or stuff that he actually passed but never implemented. The thing that's most important thing to me, and this is something I only realized by having my own boots on the ground and understanding the issue. I was on a special tour, special siur done by Kakal, by the Karen Kemet Israel and the JNF, and they were explaining how it was that the Bedouins go ahead and take various territories. So in order to deal with that, what they do is they do plantings. By creating forests in key areas, you're able to stop the continuation of Bedouins into certain areas because you're creating your own facts on the ground. They're not going to go out now and start cutting
Meaning
down
Cacao
trees.
does plantings in order to stop the illegal land grab by the Bedouin.
Correct, correct. And again, there are various things. I'm just using this as one example,
Right.
which I think is a very important example. One of the things that Abbas had asked for from Netanyahu in his coalition agreements was to put an end to this, because this is something that bothers him. Because what it does in many cases is it prevents the growth of their land grabs in many of the key strategic areas. And of course, as you might imagine, in all of the, anyways, national security wise or whatever, all of the real key strategic areas which we need for our security to be able to protect the Negev and be able to control the Negev. So we've already, gone ahead and, we have high trees and good forests in those places. What we're doing now is more, if you will, band-aids to try to go ahead and extend in various areas and prevent the land grab in various areas. So that was something that he asked for in negotiations, something that Netanyahu had agreed when he was in negotiations with the boss. And that's something that we didn't agree to. And we're actually going to go ahead and increase the funding that's needed for Kakal to be able to perform these strategic plantings, if you will, in these areas to prevent people from doing illegal activity. Those are just a few things. Again, I could.
We just lost Jeremy. Let's wait till he comes back. He was talking about I'll just fill you in the meantime. Okay, you were saying that was those are just a few of the things.
Yeah, so I was saying those are just a few of the things when it comes to the Negev. I could spend a full hour on it, but basically, what you are going to see when the coalition agreements are released is that we're going to be continuing a lot of the Netanyahu policies that were agreed upon and never implemented. And we're going to find ways to be able to continue the checks and balances and safeguards that we have in terms of the Negev. And we're going to make sure that we continue there so that we're able to maintain control. And to understand also the idea of bringing all of them into, various areas and then turning them into cities, that's actually in our interest to go ahead and do that, especially from a land perspective. And the fact is that their population has grown, and we can't have an expectation to have them agree to be in a bunch of sardines. We can reduce the areas, we can recognize certain ones, we can do new building, we can try to create, these communities, but ultimately we can't expect to have a solution where we ignore the fact that they don't live there and not offer any sort of legal, course of action. Because if that is what you do, then in essence, all you're doing is allowing illegal building. And I can tell you someone. No, I just want to say one thing in context again is, I'm a member of the Planning and Building Committee, which in my area also includes Abu Ghosh, which is an Arab village. I found that when you do allow legal building, first of all, you're able to control it a lot better. But second of all, you're also able to then have a lot more of a moral justification, and there are less issues when you go in to destroy a legal building, because people understand that there is a legal track that you can take, and there's a punishment if you decide that you're not going to go ahead and follow that. It's considered more legitimate. In areas where you don't legalize anything and you don't allow anything, then you just open up the door to black markets and people doing things illegally. You have to also be able to offer a legal path to do things. And that's really very big key here. And that's something we do within the agreements.
Right, and just to give people context, the Negev is Israel's desert down in the south. It is the largest landmass in Israel. I mean, we have one major city in the Negev, which is Beersheba. Other than that, just some little Jewish towns, and the Bedouin who society treats as nomads, even though they're not nomads anymore because they live in their same homes. Well, they basically just take land. Whereas people who want to live in cities, the cities or towns have to be developed, and then they have to pay a lot of money to buy a house. You're talking about these the Bedouin that just take land for free, whether they put up tents or they build houses, and then they take more land, and they're basically eating up most of Israel's desert area. And unfortunately, with that also comes crime. The roads are not always safe, and they're throwing rocks. And during the riots a few weeks ago, they put burning tires on roads, and they were stopping Jewish cars, and really, really crazy situation that needs to be taken care of. Now, I wanted to ask you this, just following up last question dealing with the Negev issue, because a few days ago, I don't know who it was from the Amina party, said everything dealing with the Negev issue and the Bedouin there and the agreement with Abbas. We've gone according to all the talks that we had with the Israeli organization Regavim. Regavim is an organization that tries to help Israeli authorities by being on top of these land issues where the Israeli authorities are falling and not taken care of. But Regavim came back and said, "Wait a second, this. Yes, we sat and talked with them, but what you're saying now is not going according to what we spoke about. What you said you would do." What's your reply to that?
We talked with a lot of people. Regavim obviously play a very important role when it comes to this issue and many other issues. If you're looking at the Area C issue that we're dealing with as well, a lot of the notes that they brought were definitely taken into account. I don't think Regavim were expecting that we were going to take 100% of everything that they said and endorse that and put it into the program and expect also that Abbas would agree to it. There's a number of contradictions between, the stuff that they're saying and, the understanding of our philosophy that some of it does need to be recognized because Netanyahu did, and it would seem pretty silly for us to go back on that stuff and so on and so forth. But I think, again, when you look at the final things that come out, Regavim will no doubt do a report. They'll most likely say this is stuff we approve of, this is stuff we don't approve of. They always they hold us accountable, just like they hold everyone else before us accountable, and those after us will probably also. Regavim's not the only ones we talk to. We talk to other people as well. Of course, if I had a guess, and I'm sure you would agree with me, a majority of people in Regavim probably did not vote for Yamina in the last elections. And I don't think that the expectation was, like I said, that we would be able to take 100% of what they wanted and find some way for Mansour Abbas to sign off on that. I don't think Regavim expected that either. What the MK was saying when he was mentioning that we had passed this by Regavim is that they understood more or less what we were trying to do. We took a lot of notes. They had a very, very big impact. I'm telling you, they had a very big impact in terms of how we ended up coming to the final resolution in terms of the writing of what it is that we did. Hopefully, again, we'll be able to continue to have a good relationship in the future and continue talks. If they want to go out and slander us in the press, I think it'll be more difficult for us to do that. But, this goes back to what I was telling you, Avi, before. There are a lot of, I understand, tension is very high. And like I said, I have a thick skin, me. This stuff doesn't really get to me. I just feel bad for all these people who are writing me a lot of stuff now. They're going to have to send me some apologies in the next week or two once they get back to wanting, help on a lot of these issues. We're looking to try to work with people and help. And I want these people to be a part of the discussion on a lot of these very important issues. If people want to go ahead and slander us and put, make various arguments public and so on and so forth, it's just going to be more difficult for us to have trust, and it's going to be more difficult for them to be part of the process. They need to make a decision where it is that they want to go. Maybe, Avi, you can suggest for all of them to take a 1-week vacation to the Negev, maybe to Beersheba, maybe to Mitzpeh Ramon. There's a few good destinations in Mitzpeh Ramon you can go to, and just cool down a little bit and then come back with clear heads.
Listen, I think plenty more issues to talk about and go into, but I think that's a good way to end. It's going to be listen. Obviously, my dream still is until Sunday. If somehow Gideon Sa'ar and Naftali Bennett decide, together with Netanyahu, they're going to put all these policies in place, with them figuring out how they could be prime ministers and make a full right wing government, not to be afraid of the potential dangers of allowing the progressive left and anti-Zionists in power. But so far, that's not looking that way, and challenging times ahead. Wishing you the best of luck. I mean, we'll find out after Sunday if this is what's happening, and then we'll move forward and win and pray that you guys do the best job possible, holding our own, protecting the interests of the Jewish people. I mean, again, I don't envy you. Like you said yourself, you're about to be part of a government together with the same people you've been arguing against forever. Not for a year, not for forever. That's not an easy situation for you or anyone else of the Yamina or the New Hope Tikva Chadasha parties to be in. I don't envy you, and I admit, for me it's easy. For me, it's easy to bring up the concerns, bring out the problems. You're gonna be in it, having to deal with it, and defend the situation that you're in, trying to make the most of it, while also paying the price necessary in order for that reality to be. I do not envy you.
You know, I'll say on this, if we do have a few more minutes, you know, that NGOs are going to play their role. And again, I understand that, you know, and journalists are going to play their role. And I understand that. That's the way of the game. We're going to play our role, and our role is to govern. And for many years, even though I've gone up against these people and I've said everything that I think they're doing wrong, and they've said all the stuff that I'm doing wrong, there have been a few things that we have agreed upon. If we're able to go ahead and have this government where we're able to work on those few things that all of us agree upon, and again, these are all domestic issues, they're not international issues. But if we're able to go ahead and deal with these things, build more hospitals, build more universities, have better infrastructure, better transportation, if we're able to go ahead and again bring also home some of the stuff that we need for our constituency. You know, the thing that I'm most, you know, excited about is having that 3 members and that veto power on the ministerial committee of choosing judges. You know, there's a lot of good things that I believe we can do in this government. So, you know, what I'm very, very hopeful for is that we're going to be able to spend our time going ahead and bringing those policy wins. What I do want to say to the people that don't agree with the government, again, it's legitimate to not agree. You know, it's think of things that bother you. Think of concerns that you have, and send it to me, send it to the MK, send it to whoever your contact is. If you have real concerns, send it to us so that we can address it. Again, we have veto power. We can do something if you let us know about it, but find a way to do it in a respectful manner. Not because whatever, I'll read it even if it's not respectful, but try to think that, you know, the respectful thing to do if you're asking someone for help is to do it in a nice way. I can tell you, you know, the stuff that I've heard from some of my family members, I've lost friends over, you know, this type of thing. I think that people need to realize I spent the last year plus in the opposition. I, as you know, was very much against this government with Gantz and with, you know, Michaeli and Amir Peretz and all of those people. I'm going to be sitting with a lot of them right now. But I recognize that the sun went up in the morning, that entire year plus that I was in the opposition. And now I'm back in the coalition, and now we're going to be able to do things again. It's okay. You can criticize. It's okay. It's not the end of the planet. This is a vote on the confidence of the government. No Jew is being thrown out of their home here. Okay. There is no policy that's going to be enacted tomorrow. We're going to have the change of the guard. After a very long time, there's going to be a different prime minister in the state of Israel. And it's going to be a good day because as a religious Jew, I'm very proud of the fact that we're going to have the first religious Jewish leader in the state of Israel since the Second Temple. And as an Anglo, I am very proud that we're going to have the first Anglo prime minister, the first prime minister who was not born, you know, here to, Israelis that came from Europe or people who came from Europe who became prime minister here in Israel. This is also the most right-wing person to ever sit in the prime minister's chair. Let's look at those things. Those aren't just symbolic things. Those mean a lot. So I really am looking at this as a very optimistic way to be able to move things forward. If we don't, if we fail, so we'll say we tried, we failed, we'll take responsibility for that, and with everything that that entails. But give us here a little bit of faith and at least a little bit of trust to understand that we really believe that what we're doing right now is the right thing for the state of Israel and the Jewish people.
All right, very, very fair, and I'm glad you said that. Now, just to raise one last point, just following that, I think a major concern, another major concern that people are having, if I'm not mistaken, and again, tell me if this is wrong, but the information that came out is basically, if the government falls, basically Naftali Bennett is left with nothing. And he basically has no future political career. So even if potential problems come up, people are wondering, wait a second, if Bennett has no political career and if government changes for whatever reason, he's left with no position whatsoever, then he's going to be the one always giving in.
I know it's a boring answer that read the coalition stuff when they come out, the actual official one, but look, we like I said, we have checks and balances. What it comes down to is like this: if the left causes the trouble, then we're actually in a very good position, and we remain as prime minister going into the next election with everything that that entails. If we're the ones that cause the issues, if we're the ones that initiate a lot of problems, so then yeah, the sanctions go against us. I don't think that we need to worry about that because, like you said, most of the power is within the ministries that you have. Nothing is stronger than the PMO. The Prime Minister's office is a very, very, very strong office. I am fairly confident that if anyone is going to be the one causing the issues, it'll be the left. It's not going to be us. And when it comes to what we've agreed upon, anything that comes up that's not in the coalition agreements, they're not going to be able to crash the government on those things and then take Bennett's chair away. That's just not the way that things have been, written. So I understand the concerns and the stuff that you're saying. I feel that if people read the mechanisms and at least understand and comprehend them, once all that stuff goes public, that people will understand that it's not exactly like that and understand that it's the left that are more in trouble there, especially if we get to the point, if there is a switchover and Lapid does become prime minister. It'll be very, very difficult. The main thing that's there in terms of the mechanisms that Yeshatit put in there is they're afraid of us leaving the government once it's formed and then joining with Bibi down the road, right? Let's say you would have 2 years of, right now it's supposed to switch either August 27 or 29. Bennett's actually going to be prime minister for over 2 years if you pay attention. There's concern that after he's done, instead of going with Lapid, he would just then give Bibi the rotation in the second round. So most of the mechanisms that are in place are to prevent alternative governments from being formed within this Knesset. That's where a majority of the stuff go that are bad for Bennett.
Got it. Jeremy, thank you very much. May the one above, may HaKadosh Baruch Hu give you and your partners in the party, and if it becomes the government and the government, the strength to do as much good as possible for the Jewish people and the modern state of Israel. So thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Avi. Have a great day.
Everybody, I hope you enjoyed hearing this insight from Jeremy Saltan. Again, Jeremy is a Knesset insider, a consultant, and number 15 on the Amina list, Naftali Bennett's list. So he will potentially be in the government if it's formed after being voted upon on Sunday. If this was important, and again, I dealt with real issues, real concerns that many Israelis, including myself, have about the potential government being formed, and Jeremy was very was wonderful, giving us the time and his answers, dealing with all these issues and his personal concerns as well about the situation. If you enjoyed or felt this is important, please share the video. And again, if you are not yet a subscriber for the Pulse of Israel, sign up at pulseofisrael.com. Signing off from the eternal and ancestral homeland of the Jewish people. This is Avi Abelo for another episode of the Pulse of Israel. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Let's make this a better future for all of us.
Pulse of Israel, frontline videos from the Holy Land. Support our work by donating today.